I want to introduce to you Andrew Bachelder. When I first met Andrew, we were playing in a golf tournament, and he was teamed up with my group. And he starts kind of, telling me it was a Tee It Up for the Troops event. And as he's telling me his story, first of all, he's like, yeah, I'm a member out at Las Colinas Country Club. That came up in the conversation. And he caddies at Brook Hollow. And I'm like, he could see me doing the math in my head, and he's like, well, I'm also medically retired from the Marine Corps. Oh, okay. And as he goes on to tell me his story, I got to tell you, it's one of those stories, Andrew, that I was like, I got to go look this up because some things just didn't sound right. I'm like, nobody falls that far out of the sky, lives to tell about it, and then looks this damn good. And then, oh, by the way, is an unbelievable golfer. This is now my new golf coach, by the way. And so I did. I mean, I went, and so I'm not really going to give him a formal introduction. You're going to get introduced to him as we go. And, like I said, I had to go check all this out. I'm sorry for not believing you.
I totally agree.
But I'm like, he gets around really well. So, Andrew, thanks very much for being here with us. I'm honored and humbled to be in your presence.
Well, thanks for having me. This is kind of neat to come into this kind of setting and instead of standing in front of a podium. So I kind of look forward to this interview type deal.
Well, I enjoy this myself because I'm a very curious person by nature. So there are a lot of questions that I've been holding off asking you that I think we're going to definitely get into here. But you're originally from Fort Worth.
Yes, sir. Born and raised in Fort Worth.
And you enlisted in the Marine Corps right after 9/11. So can I make an assumption that 9/11 had an impact on your decision to join?
You can make the assumption, but I don't think it really had any kind of impact whatsoever at the time. I was in high school, graduated in 2000. Wasn't doing real good in high school, didn't make the best choices, was in and out of trouble, and just barely finished high school. Mom kind of told me that, hey, you're not going to sit around in here, just not do anything and live in the house. So I just kind of went around to the recruiters, and then, or I didn't. I told her that I went around to the recruiters that I was trying to do something, but I really wasn't. I was working at a golf course. I think it was, where is it at? Diamond Oaks. I was over in Diamond Oaks in Fort Worth, and I told her with fib one day that I had gone and talked to the Air Force recruiter, and I actually hadn't. And she's like, okay, well, we'll go down there tomorrow and talk to him and see. Well, I went down there the next day and actually walked into the Marines office, and then before you know it, I was on my way.
So at that point, she'd called you out.
Yeah, she called me.
And so now you got to do something.
Yep. So I had to put one foot in front of the other, and then ended up walking to the Marines office, and then by, I can't remember when that was. It had to be like November or something like that after I had already graduated. So this was 2001.
Okay.
And then in April 2002, I had shipped off to boot camp.
So did that change your thought process? I mean, all of a sudden, September 11 happens. Things are starting to heat up. There's so much uncertainty. Did you start to kind of second guess and go, maybe I better walk back down to the Air Force, or?
No, see, I just went. I think I just went into it blind, and I think that I heard that the Marines were the best. And as I told my mom that find out that my great-grandfather was a Marine, my grandfather was a Marine, my uncle is still a colonel in the Marines. So, you find out that Marines run deeper than you actually really knew. And, I wasn't very much patriotic kind of guy as a high school, and much high school kids that really aren't. They don't know a whole lot about patriotism and, what actually happened on September 11th, because I really had no clue. I just saw two planes crash into the building.
I think that's an interesting point, though, really for all of us, because, a lot of people look at those who served and say, golly, they were extremely patriotic, and that's what drew them in. It's not. I mean, the story that Andrew just told is very similar to so many people that I know, to include myself. I ended up in the Marine Corps because I was wayward. Right. And, it's not until you get in and learn, until we are taught the importance of preserving a way of life that we all, often take for granted. It's not until you know, it's ingrained in your head. Some people call it brainwashing. It's really not. Although we are really good propagandists in the Marine Corps, I will say that. But you know, your story is very similar in that regard. So then you end up in the combat engineers.
Correct.
How did you, did it choose you or did you choose it?
I chose combat engineer. They said so my father and uncle, they all used to build houses in California, like custom homes, and so I used to love building stuff. And they said, if you want to build things, combat engineer's the way to go. If you want to blow stuff up, combat engineer's the way to go. So I was like, okay, then we'll do that. You know, you can either build stuff or you can get into the combat sections of it. So stuck with combat engineer.
So you like to blow things up?
I did.
Okay,
yes.
all right.
Yes.
And so from there initially, I mean, when you were going through your training, did you know already that you guys were going to be headed? Were things heated up to the point where you're like, okay, I'm actually going to put this stuff to use? Because when I did all my training, it was all, you know, it could happen, it might happen, but there was no real threat that was about to happen.
Right.
You knew there was a threat out there.
I think it really kicked in because first day I checked in October 2002 to the fleet. So, you know, it was April to October that I was going through boot camp, MCT, and then MOS school. Mm-hmm. So October when we got to the fleet, it kind of kicked in, you know, hey, we're going to be going to Iraq in next year sometime. When, we didn't know. I think I ended up getting married December 31st, 2002, just before we deployed.
Really?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
yeah,
wow.
So just before we deployed, I had ran off, you know, and as they say in the Marine Corps, if the Marine Corps wanted you to have a wife, they would have issued you one and all this other stuff. So, but, you know, I ran off and got married and right before we deployed, and I had known her I met her in July, so you do the math.
You just knew.
6 months, 5 months, I knew her, and then we were married and still married to today. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. So you get into Iraq. You're part of the initial invasion, and what's interesting, and I don't know if my timing is exactly correct here, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in the combat engineer support element, they're kind of farmed out and attached to infantry units, which is what I did in the Marine Corps. And he was attached specifically to the 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, which is the exact unit that I was a part of when I was in the fleet. And subsequently, just on a sad note, the most recent departure out of Afghanistan that made the news, that's where all those Marines were from. So,
correct.
So when you get into, let's just skip right to the Battle of Fallujah.
So the Battle of Fallujah was before the invasion of 2003.
Right.
Correct?
Yes.
So in 2003, I was attached to 1-5. We were the combat engineer battalion that was in charge of breaching the Iraqi-Kuwaiti border and filling in the berms and ditches to allow the 1st Marine Division, or RCT-5, to move up towards Baghdad. But then after returning in 2003, we returned back to Iraq February of 2004 for the initial invasion. That's when we were attached to 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines.
Gotcha.
And we were February in Fallujah, 2004.
Right. So Fallujah has been, for those of you who are not familiar with the Battle of Fallujah, a lot of Marine Corps folklore has already come out of that. One person described it as walking directly into hell with your eyes wide open. What was your experience during the Battle of Fallujah?
So the Battle of Fallujah was interesting. I mean, I did a lot of engineer work. When we first invaded the city, you know, we started at the northwest corner, I believe, northeast corner of the city, and started from house to house to house to house. And just as our sections, we cleared the houses. Then when we were told to pull out of Fallujah, we left some elements inside of Fallujah, and that's when I was able to come out and then become the support element to bring in stuff here and there for a few weeks. But the experience in Fallujah I think, was completely different than the first Iraq. You know, we didn't do building to building. We were ready for building to building because we did mount training. We did a lot of mount training before Fallujah. We did a lot of small unit cohesions because we knew we'd be in teams of 4, teams of 5, you know, just breaching. So,
yeah, and to kind of set that context, you know, he used the acronym MOUT, M-O-U-T. If you think we got a lot of acronyms in the mortgage business, let me tell you, you know, it's tenfold in the military. But, you know, if you look out behind me, what you see is a lot, you know, just easy landscape. Traditional wars, conventional warfare has been fought on terrain like this, where, you know, you can see the enemy far enough out if you have the right elements in place. MOUT, meaning military operation in urban terrain, like he said, clearing houses, it's a whole different world. I mean, it's 4-dimensional warfare. You don't know if they're underneath you, above you, around the door. They can go through the door, through the wall. It's scary. And so, you know, that's what he's talking about there. So did you have to be in a position where you were going through that yourself, or were you just setting the breach for the follow-on?
Well, I didn't do a whole lot of breaching. We did some door breaching, and then we did door kicking, really. We were just clearing houses. We didn't catch a whole lot of resistance from the first 2 or 3 days, I think. There was more, they were deeper into the city. And then as we got deeper into the city, we kind of got pulled back. You know, we were only into Fallujah for 2 weeks into the actual battle. 2 or 3 weeks, I think, that we actually, then we got pulled back, and then we became a support element to, you know, 1 battalion was here, 1 battalion was, there was 4 or 5 battalions that had the city surrounded until, you know, ultimately was Vigilant Resolve in November 2004 when they actually took Fallujah.
Does anything in particular stick out to you during those 2 weeks?
Yeah, Corporal Tyler Faye was killed that night, April 4th, 2004. We had worked for 3 weeks. Our main priority was to go build a bunch of bunkers for the Iraqi police, and we were going to go set them in certain places around the city for them to provide security, you know, checkpoints for the city, and, you know, sifting through the bad guys and stuff like that. As we pulled under the bridge, we became under heavy combat fire. Mortars, we took heavy machine gun fire and a lot of RPGs. And then we had 2-1 above us on the railroad tracks, you know, providing cover. And then we just got the word that Corporal Faye was hit. And then, you know, later he didn't make it that day.
And what was your relationship to Corporal Faye?
We were in the same platoon together. I didn't really get to know Corporal Faye very much. He was a fill-in. He was in the battalion. He came from another squad,
okay,
or another platoon, into Bravo Company, and he was a little saltier than I was, so I hadn't quite.
That means seasoned.
He was a little more senior than I was. I will tell you an amazing story about Corporal Faye, and I've had a few amazing stories in my life. But just this last June, I was in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, and I was doing a Tee It Up for the Troops event, and they had a Gold Star family there, and the Gold Star family sitting there was Corporal Faye's father, and I had no idea that they were going to be there. And so when they went to go introduce me to talk to him, or to talk to the group, I could do nothing but talk to Corporal Faye's dad. You know, I spent that 5-10 minutes just talking to him, because I was unfortunately one of the Marines that did inventory his gear and to send it back to his family. So that was the last memory that I have of Corporal Faye.
Kind of a God thing, if you will.
Yeah. Just, you know, it's only 15 years later. You know what I mean? Because it happened in 2004, and so in 2021, 16 years later, then it.
So as you're inventorying his gear, what's going through your mind, knowing that you're collecting all of these things to send back to his now Gold Star family?
Right.
What's going through your mind?
You know, it was hard it's hard to really think about it, what was going through at the time. I think at the time, that was the first one that I had dealt with. We had lost individuals in OIF-1, but I hadn't dealt with it that close. So and not knowing Faye as much as as some of the other individuals, it just, you know, it was just a somber moment, really, you know, just a somber moment.
Oh, I can see where it'd be a little scary too.
Yeah,
I mean,
for
it's just,
sure.
it's reality hitting you right in the face.
Yeah, for sure, because you never really know if it would have been you or somebody else.
So you get through Fallujah, and again, it was as far as all accounts go, it was tough. It was a very, very tough Marine Corps battle. A lot of wonderful stories came out of it as well, about, you know, guys just protecting the individual to their left and right. But you then transition into the air wing.
Correct.
Which, by the way, is very traitorous, going from the ground element to the air wing, but I'm going to let this pass. And so you end up as a crew chief on a Huey, is that right?
Correct.
And so for those of you who've, if you've ever watched a movie like Platoon, anything Vietnam era, those were Hueys, you know, where, you know, they would kind of a big rounded nose, the side doors open, and, you know, and that's where, you know, that
The famous wop wop.
Yes, I mean, just a very distinct sound. So you end up in a Huey, which, like I said, this was not that long ago, and these were birds that we were using in Vietnam. So, by the way, in the Marine Corps, we get the very last of all the budgets. So tell me about your experience as a crew chief.
So I thought I liked to blow stuff up. Man, I like to fly in helicopters a lot more because, one, I don't have to carry the 70 pounds that you do, right?
Fair.
And then two, I don't have to use wheels. I can just get up and go, and it's a lot faster. So, and I think that seeing the aerial perspective of a combat zone is a lot safer, or you would say. You would think it would be safer from the top.
I was going to say, we're almost there. I don't know if it was that much safer, but.
But I think it just the adrenaline rush, you know, 150, 160 miles an hour hanging out of the side of a helicopter, shooting guns and banking and burning and turning. It's an adrenaline rush. It really is.
Well, and I know that, you know, I give him grief about that, but I was actually in a helo company.
Right.
So that meant in the infantry, we would use helicopters to transport us from one spot to another. And I will say that those pilots and the crew chiefs in the air wing, man, they understand the importance of that air cover for the guy on the ground who doesn't have the ability to just lift off and go whenever they need it.
Right.
And so you guys were, the fateful night, you were on a mission in Afghanistan.
Yes, sir.
Take it from there.
Take it there. So October 26, 2009, I was woken up about midnight, 11:30, to go on we did 12-hour shifts as crew chiefs and pilots. We went midnight to midnight, or midnight to noon, noon to midnight. I was on the midnight to noon, so they woke us up at about 11:30 because we had a mission that was going off at 01. And they briefed us. We were escorting 2 Army Chinooks for an insert for a high-value individual. And as the Huey and the Cobra, we were supposed to provide close air support over the top as they inserted all the guys for the insert.
So these were special operations.
The special operations FBI guys. I found out later there were some FBI guys on there, some special operations. After takeoff, we lost sight of our lead helicopter. The pilot inside the helicopter, in our cockpit, was able to say we're blind, but unable to say that we're blind on lead over the radio, over our intercom. And by the time we had done that, I heard, "Oh shit," from one of the from the pilots, and then heard a meshing of metal. The lead helicopter had gotten. I think that we got out in front of lead helicopter, and then when lead went to cross over, they ended up clipping us at some port of our helicopter, and then we ended up crashing to the ground from about 300 feet in the air. When we hit, we ended up losing our tail rotor and our tail boom, and then became just a fuselage. And then when we hit the ground, I think I was thrown out of the helicopter. And then it caught fire. It was burning. All the rounds were burning off and cooking off. And didn't really know what was going on. All I could hear was fire crackling, and one of the pilots was screaming. I was calling for Fleury, I was calling for Jones, and nobody was answering me. And then somebody came up and started moving me, and I started screaming. And I told them, no, 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 don't move me. My biggest fear was being captured alive. But I was in so much pain, I think, in my pelvis area that they were trying to get me out of there. But they ended up getting me out of there within 6 minutes of.
And who is they?
So the two helicopters that we were escorting, they saw the Cobra explode, and then they saw our fire from our helicopter. So mission turned from assault to recovery and, life-saving a mission from there.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the epitome of a mission only survives the first round fired, or the mission statement, if you will.
Right.
So you woke up, you hear crackling, and that's one of those things a lot of people don't even think about. The ammunition, when it catches fire, and that's one of the things that the enemy is always going to go for, and that's what took down a lot of ships in World War II, was that the ships would be, or the armory would be hit.
Yep.
And that's what sinks the ship, because all the secondary explosions. So was that going through your mind that, oh my God.
I think I was more worried about getting hit by one.
Yeah.
Really, honestly, because we had 550 cal rounds and 1,500 7.62 rounds. We didn't have any rockets, but we did have, about 2,000 rounds of bullets.
And a 50 caliber round, mind you, by the Geneva Convention, is not intended for human beings. It literally can take someone and cut them in half. So yeah, I can see where that would have been a little bit of a fear to you. You wake up and they're trying to move you, you're screaming because you realize everything's hurting. Describe all the injuries from 300 feet worth of fall.
So I broke my right tibia fibula. I had an open book pelvic fracture. Basically, for males, our pelvis doesn't open up. Females, it does to allow the passage of the baby. But mine had opened about 5 millimeters, which I was bleeding on the inside. So they didn't know if that was probably one of the other ways that I was going to pass away, was just from internal bleeding. I blew out my left acetabulum. That's where your ball sits inside the socket of your hip. I broke 3 transverse processors on my back, 2 collapsed lungs, 4 broken ribs, and a broken shoulder, TBI. And it's not a severe TBI, but a bad enough head injury that it still affects me to this day a little bit.
You think? Half those things, I don't know about y'all, but half those things I didn't even know we had in our body. So you go right into recovery. But yet, I'm going to fast forward, and then we're going to go back and fill this in. Inside of 6 months, if my research is correct, you were walking back into the hangar on active duty.
I did I was on active duty. It was March. I think it was March 1st. I walked back into the hangar. So it was November, December, January, February, March. Within 5 or 6 months, I walked back into the hangar.
So physically, you walked back in.
I could move. Yeah, physically I could move. A lot of my injuries were, osteo and ortho and all that stuff. So, which I was able to recover from.
But mentally and emotionally,
I walked out the door as soon as I walked back in the door. So, when I walked through the door, all I saw was a burning helicopter. And, it was a burning helicopter. And I think the day I went back, one of the wives was there. I'm not sure. I think the wife was there. I can't remember if she was there, but I know she was at the squadron one of the days that I had shown up. But I just couldn't see a regular helicopter. I was just seeing a mangled mess.
And was it literally the same thing that you saw when you came to and looked over? Is that what you kept seeing?
I didn't see anything when I looked over. Like at nighttime? Mm-hmm. You talking about down at the crash site?
Yes.
No, it was dark. And actually, when I was sitting on the aux bag, which is the auxiliary fuel bag, mm-hmm. and so that thing had exploded, and I had fuel all in my face, so I had never opened my eyes for, I don't think I opened my eyes till I got to Germany maybe, or Bethesda, or Germany. I don't remember Bastion. I don't remember staying in Bastion. I just remember they called my wife when I was in Germany, and I think I told her I was sorry, and then that was it. And then
Really? You told her you were sorry?
Yeah, I told her I was sorry. Well, before I left on this deployment, I told her, I was like, look, I know this is the third one, but I just don't have a good feeling about this deployment. I swear to God, I told her the day, like, you know, we left on Mother's Day, May 11th, 2009, and I told her probably May 10th or 9th, and I was like, I just don't have a good feeling about this deployment.
Wow.
Yeah,
So, you know, one of the things that I want you to touch on, because I think it's extremely important that all of us as members of society understand it. You know, you mentioned, you know, the physical ailments. You've obviously healed, you know, I don't want to say without problem,
right.
but you're functioning. You know, mentally and emotionally, you're pretty solid.
Right.
But to get to that point, you had to overcome, like you said, a little bit of TBI,
Right.
but a lot of survivor's guilt.
Correct. Yeah.
Walk us through the survivor's guilt,
Okay.
because I know it's a real deal.
Right. Yeah. So in my crash, I was only one of two survivors. There was 2 on the Cobra, and there was 4 on my helicopter. My crew chief that I had flown with, Corporal Gregory Fleury, he was killed that night, and Captain Jones was killed that night. Captain Smith and myself were the only 2 survivors. The other 2 pilots were Captain Van de Giesen and Captain Mitchell. And so I wore that on my shoulder, my heart, my just everything, on why, struggled a lot on like why I survived. Why am I the only one here? Now there was another, Captain Van de Giesen had kids. So I was the only one with kids other than Captain Van de Giesen. We were the only 2 that were married. He had a kid that was actually born today, 15 days after the crash. He was set to come home. We never got to meet him. So Colin's birthday is today. He turns 12. But I suffered a lot with why I was spared and stuff like that. So September 11th, 2000, and I think it was 11 or 12, I tried to commit suicide. I was on copious amounts of pain medications. I was in copious amounts of pain and tried to take my life that night. But for another reason, I'm still here. And I think that's opened my eyes a lot on, you know, different ways, you know, why I'm here. Obviously, there's a reason I'm here, and it's to spread, you know, my story, you know. That's the only way I can really think about it. It's got to be, you know, just like I've said all the time, is if I can rise from the depths of hell and as a champion, then anybody can do it.
So, I mean, I'll just say, I mean, thank God you're still here.
Thank you.
Thank God for, you know, for your wife, for your children. But like you said, to be able to share this story, and that was one of the reasons that, you know, that I thought this was a very pertinent story. A lot of veterans that are walking around out there are survivors of similar type situations. For those of you who can see it, I've got a ring on my right index finger. This ring represents the 22 members of the military who take their own life every day because of things like what Andrew is talking about. And so it can be any number of different reasons. And so, Andrew, I want to kind of go into that a little bit more, because as members of society, our job should be just to embrace and to love and really just, you know, put our arms around somebody and tell them, we're here for you, we're here with you. Right. It's not to fix it. Okay, we can't fix it.
Right.
But when you talked about the whole idea of suicide, was it, and you were in pain, were you in physical pain? Was it because your mind wasn't right because you were on drugs? Is it because you had nowhere else to turn? And I'm asking all this, and I'm going to give you a second to think about it. I used to think that suicide, I'm not wired that way. I don't even think about it. It doesn't, and so I was very, very naive to it. And that is, I used to be very embarrassed when I first realized just how real it is and how naive I was, how stupid I was.
I think I would be standing right next to you if you talked about being naive. Before I got to where I was like, how can somebody be so selfish to take your own life? I mean, you have so much going for you, but how can you be so selfish? But I was like, I've never been to where they are. I haven't been in that position. I haven't felt the need of no help of, my wife was there, but my wife was ready to, this is 3 years after she's been dealing with, from day one, whether it's to clean my feet, wipe my butt, change my diaper. I didn't wear a diaper, but change my clothes, whatever it was. She's been there from day one, but she's only seen me get worse. Yeah, physically better, mentally worse, right? So the medications, it changed me. It just destroyed me. It made me stay in the home, not, aggressive. I was never physical with anybody, but, it just changed everything. Changes the way your brain works, the pain medication it does. It makes you think you're in pain when you're really not in pain. I haven't taken a pain medication in over 6 years almost. So, you got to be able to battle. You got to be able to be one with yourself. You know what I mean? You got to be able to love yourself before you can love anybody else. And
so when you take, I mean, you tried to overdose on pain medication.
correct.
It didn't work. What, do you recall what really triggered your mind to go, wait a minute, this ain't the answer, but this isn't the path?
Well, with taking those pain medications, I ended up in a hospital. I was on so many, I took so many pain medications and different medicines that I was basically in a coma for 2 or 3 days. I was a zombie. I woke up, and then it just started. I went back into a psychiatric hospital. I've been into 2 or 3 psychiatric hospitals, but that was the last one that I've been into. It's just, I lost my train of thought.
Well, that's fine, because I want to ask a question. So when you talk about a psychiatric hospital, I mean, what a lot of people think about, obviously, what comes to mind is a straitjacket, and
right.
you're a danger to your,
right.
not
and
just
it's
others,
not,
but yourself.
It's people that are. When I got in there, I'm like, this is not who I am. I mean, this is people with heroin addictions, with crack addictions, with severe bipolar addiction or diseases, and I'm just like, I am not in this. I'm not on this level, Andrew.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, you are not on this level. So I think at that point, when I'm like, I need to get out of here with that.
So you had a conversation.
Like, you are not,
that was your awakening.
In this, yeah. So this is not where you are. This is not where you need to be. Mother didn't raise you like that, So
was it at this point when you said, man, I got to find something else to occupy me? And is that where golf comes in?
Well, that's where my mother had introduced. She said, hey, President Bush holds a Warrior Open for wounded individuals here in Dallas. She said, maybe you should apply 1 year. And so in 2012, I applied for the 2013 one and got accepted.
And when was the last time you had played golf before that? Or had you been playing
I
on
had
and off?
played in physical therapy
Okay.
a little bit before I had gotten out of the military. But, when I moved back home, I hadn't played at all.
Okay.
So
So you apply for the opportunity.
got accepted for the 2013 one, and then I kept getting accepted just for getting placed because I placed so high in the top 5.
Well, okay, so if you hadn't played in a long time, you're dealing with all these, physical injuries. You're coming off of the mental challenges of,
right.
of the drugs. How in the world did you get ready for this? Or did you?
Well, I turned my life, instead of sitting around the house, I got off the pain medications, and then I just started going to the golf course, right? So instead of focusing my mind on my pain and, all this, I would go focus my mind on a little white golf ball and trying to get it inside of a hole for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day.
So you found that to be very therapeutic.
Very, very therapeutic.
So my boss is here, and I just want him to know that,
This is very, very therapeutic, yep.
Okay. Okay, so you find yourself in the President Bush's Warriors Open, and tell me about that experience, because
I mean, you get to meet a president, and then you're playing golf in front of him. Good thing I didn't top the first tee. I may hit a groove high, but I didn't top it. And, you know, it's just, I think it's the fact of meeting more warriors that are the same as you, that have been blown up, that have lost limbs, that have dealt with pain medications, and I think seeing and getting thrown back into another brotherhood and, you know, camaraderie type deal, building a new network, which has really helped me out quite a bit.
So did it kind of return a sense of purpose, a sense of camaraderie?
Yeah, I think once I told my story, you know, once I told my story for the first time, you know, that, and for me be able to open up and tell my story, and, and you know, it just, a lot of times not a dry eye in a room whenever you're telling those stories, which, you know, it makes you feel better that, you know, you're moving people and people are actually hearing you and listening. And, you know, I've had plenty of people come up and say, hey, thanks for that. And, you know, you saved me.
Right.
You know, I watched this here. I watched some video way back when, and it saved me. And so it's worth it, you know.
Yeah, it's a, I mean, when I think back, the part about your story that sticks out the most to me before we go back to the golf a little bit is Captain Van de Giesen's son being born 15 days after he was killed in action.
Right.
And I think the reason that sticks out to me so much is because, you know, we think about things like, I mean, first of all, we don't even think about a lot of these things. Unfortunately, in a time of war, it happens all too often. And so you probably have developed kind of a bond with that family, I would assume?
Yeah, I think, you know, I've actually, they live up in Massachusetts, so I've become a second team Boston guy, and, you know, it was the hardest point is trying to, for me is to speak, how am I going to be represented, and how am I going to be seen through these 4 families that have lost a loved one, and I was spared in that same crash, you know. So I think from the beginning I was accepted from them, you know, and as I was accepted, it just became, you know, more and more, and raising money for the funds that they do, and raising money for, you know, the different organizations that they work with, and it's just been, you know, healing for me and probably them as well.
So kind of shifting back to your golf, I mean, you were on the Golf Channel, not just like on the Golf Channel as a mention. You were one of the contestants.
Correct. Yeah, they had a 2018. They came out with a show called The Shot Makers that was filmed at Las Vegas and Topgolf, and I was part of. There was 2 veterans on there. My buddy Chad and I competed against each other in a 2-man event. So.
Okay, so you guys competed against one another. You weren't competing with all the other ones?
No, we weren't on. Well, we competed against everybody, but we weren't on the same team. We were
Okay.
teamed up. It was a 1 male, 1 female group, but we were on a different team.
Yeah. So and outside of you and Chad, everybody else in this event was like they had professional golfer attached to their name, and then, you know, here comes a, you know, meathead Marine and soldier, and, you know, hey, we're in it too. I mean, so I noticed that all the other candidates were really good looking.
Right.
But when
then they had us.
they just feel so
exactly.
So tell us about your experience in the Shot Makers.
So
series.
you know, that was helped with the nerves and stuff with playing golf. You know, being able to hold a club without shaking out of your hand, or being able to swing a golf club and under pressure. So I mean, it was definitely a lot more pressure. I think it was like 30 degrees in Vegas when they shot this. They didn't really think that one through.
Yeah, but, no kidding. Well, most of the top golfs have the heater up there.
Well, they had heaters and everything.
Okay, but that wasn't enough.
What Golf Channel would bring out for you. Very cold, very cold.
And did you win?
Well, we got 4th. We ended up getting 4th place.
4th place.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Tell you what, though, I mean, as you know, when you're going up against professional golfers, and you guys finished 4th, that's pretty impressive.
Yep, it was fun. It was definitely a good experience.
So, you know, the whole concept behind the name of our podcast, Lessons from the Front. You know, there's so many stories out there, you know, like the one you've told us today, that lessons come out of that, and they're applicable to everybody's life on a daily basis.
Right.
What is one lesson that you're gonna teach to your kids based on the fact that you fell over 300 feet out of the sky and lived to tell about it. Not just lived to tell about it, but you've actually thrived as a result of it.
Right.
Because of your approach.
I mean, the ones that I tell my kids, you know, my kids have been affected. They're 17 and 14 now. And my biggest lesson is you have to love yourself. I mean, because my kids go to therapy, and I didn't do that. I didn't tell them to go to therapy. They wanted to go to therapy.
Really?
Yes. Yes. It was, my daughter approached me one day and she said, hey, I want to go talk to somebody. And I'm like, wow, okay. But you know what? That's what I've been saying for the last 7 years. If you have an issue, go talk to somebody. You don't have to talk to a psychologist. Talk to somebody that will listen, and then we'll get you, you know, go the way that, you know, because I don't go to psychologists. I don't do the therapist thing. I don't do that. This is my therapy right here, because I'm not judged. By the psychologist will judge you.
That is possibly true.
But, you know, so you got to, that number one lesson is you got to love yourself. And if you can pass that down with all of them, you know, that would be.
I mean, hey, if you don't love yourself, who will, right?
Right, exactly, exactly.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And so in a minute, I want to open it up to any questions. But, you know, first I want to ask you one final question from me. You know, Carry the Load, we're about restoring the true meaning of Memorial Day. We're about making sure that those who have made the ultimate sacrifice for you and for me and for everybody in this room, simply because we're worth it, they carried us to their death. And so it's our job to carry them. Who are you carrying?
I carry Captain Kyle Van de Giesen, Captain Seth Mitchell, Captain Jones, Corporal Gregory Fleury, Corporal Tyler Faye, and Sergeant Elijah Parker.
There's an old saying, I think it's a Jewish proverb, that we die 2 deaths in this life. The first is when the final breath leaves our body, and the second is when someone stops mentioning our name, or they mention our name for the last time. And so what I would ask you all to do is keep these individuals in your thoughts and prayers, and don't let them be forgotten. So before I turn it over to questions from the audience, I just want to say, Marine, happy birthday, and thank you very much.
Semper Fi, sir.
Semper Fi.
Thank you.